Welcome to our deep dive today. You guys have sent in a ton of really interesting questions. And they all seem to start with the same phrases like, am I or are you? There's definitely a theme here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. This set of questions, it feels like a phase of deep introspection, trying to understand like yourself and where you fit in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's so many questions like, am I on the right track? Or am I being too demanding? I mean, like a masterclass in self-doubt. It touches on like everything, relationships, careers, even what we're eating.
That's so true. It's interesting, isn't it? It's like how all these questions, they sort of cluster around certain anxieties, almost like if you could see them, it'd be a visual representation of someone's current mental state. And the fact that certain questions repeat, am I on the right track? That repetition, it might point to a concern that feels really pressing right now.
Oh, that's a good point. It's not just like the questions. It's like how often they come up and how intense they feel. Like, are these questions even looking for a real answer? Or is it something deeper?
That's what's fascinating to me. Some questions are simple, like, are the documents ready? That's a yes or a no. But others, like, am I on the right track? Those are about feelings, more than finding one right answer.
I see. So it's less about the answer and more about why do we keep asking the question?
Exactly. That's it. The question itself becomes a tool. It helps you reflect on yourself. Take, am I being too demanding? That could come from being scared of rejection or maybe a pattern from past relationships. So by looking at why you ask, it helps you address what's making you anxious.
Okay, that makes sense. Instead of being stuck in this loop of, am I this or am I that, we should shift gears and ask, okay, what's behind this question and what can I learn from it?
It's like looking at a knot. Instead of pulling on it, you slow down and look at each strand, see how they're connected, maybe even find a hidden pattern.
And maybe that's where the are you questions come in. It seems like those are directed outwards, right? Like you're looking for information or confirmation from someone else. Do you think that's maybe a way to look for validation outside of ourselves, to try and quiet those anxieties inside?
It's definitely possible. Take a simple question like, are you okay? Sometimes it's just caring about someone, but sometimes it might be that we need reassurance ourselves. If we can confirm that other people are okay, maybe we feel a little better too.
Yeah, I can see that. And there are a lot of questions that are super logistical. Like, are we meeting today? Are you coming to the party? Almost like trying to organize the outside world to deal with the uncertainty swirling around inside.
That need for control. That makes sense. When we feel uncertain about ourselves, it's normal to look for stability around us. But if we only rely on what other people tell us, that can get tricky.
That's true. We can't always expect others to reassure us or give us all the answers. We need to develop that inner compass, that self-trust. The kind that lets us handle uncertainty without needing someone to tell us it's okay all the time.
Yes. That's the key, finding that balance between getting guidance and trusting your gut. It's a lifelong process, and these questions, maybe they're a sign that you're working towards that balance.
So we've got these two groups, am I questions reflecting anxieties inside, and are you questions looking for validation or information from outside? And somewhere in between those two, there's a path towards understanding ourselves better and feeling more sure of ourselves. But how do we get from asking these questions to actually doing something about them?
That's where it gets really interesting, because asking is just the start. It's like opening a door to a whole new world. But to explore that world, you got to step through that door and start walking. So that brings us to a big question. What does action even mean here? I mean, we're talking about anxiety and uncertainty and wanting to feel validated. How do we actually take steps forward with all that?
It is overwhelming, right? Like, where do you even start? The questions themselves feel so huge. I was reading this study, and it said that our brains actually see uncertainty as like a threat. It triggers this stress response, and that makes it harder to think straight and make decisions.
It makes sense, doesn't it? It's like all those am I questions. They're putting your brain on high alert, like you're in danger, even when there's nothing really wrong. And when you're in that fight or flight mode, you can't really access that part of your brain that solves problems.
So how do we calm down that inner alarm system and start thinking strategically? I mean, we've talked about understanding the questions, but how do we go from just analyzing to taking action?
One thing that helps me is this, I try to reframe the am I questions into what if statements. Like instead of am I on the right track, try asking what if I explore a different path? Or what if I change what right track even means to me?
Oh, that's interesting. Like just changing the words. You move from doubting yourself to thinking about what's possible. You're not stuck in that am I loop anymore. You're opening up these new ways to explore things.
Exactly. And once you have those what-if statements, you can start brainstorming real actions. If you're asking, am I in the right relationship? Maybe your what-if statement is, what if I tell my partner what I need more clearly? Or what if I try therapy to figure out my relationship patterns?
So it's about breaking those big, vague questions down into smaller steps. Steps that you can actually do. And maybe those steps don't give you all the answers, but they help you see things more clearly and move forward with purpose.
It's like making a map, but instead of having one destination, you're focused on the direction you want to go. And as you go, you gather information, you try things out, and you change your course if you need to.
And I want to go back to this idea of needing validation from others. You said it can be tricky, but are there times when it's actually good? Like, if you're always doubting what you can do, wouldn't it be reassuring to get feedback from someone you trust?
For sure. Getting input from people you trust. Mentors, friends, family. They can give you great insights. And it can boost your confidence. But you have to be careful. Are you just looking for someone to agree with you? Or are you open to hearing different views, even if they challenge your ideas?
That's a good point. It's about being aware of why we want that outside input.
Yeah.
Are we looking for a cheerleader? Or are we really open to learning and growing?
And don't forget, validation from others doesn't last. It can make you feel good for a bit. But true self-worth, it comes from inside. It's about building that inner confidence that helps you handle uncertainty without always needing someone to tell you you're doing okay.
Okay, so we talked about reframing questions, breaking down big goals into smaller steps, and being mindful of why we look for validation. But what about those really deep questions? The ones that don't have easy answers? Like, am I living a meaningful life? Or am I being true to myself?
Those are the questions that stick with you. They make you think about your values, your purpose, what your place is in the world. And there's no one right answer. It's a journey of figuring yourself out. And the questions themselves become like a guide. They help you understand who you are and what really matters to you.
It's funny, you mentioned before how our brains see uncertainty as a threat. But what if we thought about it differently? What if uncertainty was an opportunity?
I love that. Instead of being scared of not knowing, we can see it as a chance to learn, to grow, to create something new. It's when we don't know what's going to happen that we're the most open to new things and new ideas.
It's like that quote, live the questions now. Perhaps you will gradually, without noticing it, live your way into the answer.
That's beautiful. It's not about having all the answers. It's about being brave enough to keep asking questions, to stay curious, and to trust that the journey itself will get us where we need to be.
Talking about questions and answers makes me think of something that keeps popping up in our notes. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Don't you think there's a connection there?
Definitely. It's like you're sensing that sometimes words just aren't enough. We need to use our other senses, feel our emotions, see the world in a new way.
And maybe that's another way to approach these questions. Instead of trying to put them into perfect words, maybe we need to try and picture them. What does "am I on the right track" actually look like? What images or colors or feelings come to mind?
That's powerful. When we use our imagination, we can understand things on a deeper level. It goes beyond words. It's like we're skipping over the logical part of our brain and tapping into our intuition, our subconscious. That's where those big questions often live.
It's like creating a mood board.
Yeah.
But for our lives. Instead of words, we use images, textures, sounds, even smells to capture what we're looking for. And maybe as we do that, we start to see patterns and connections and possibilities that we didn't see before.
It's a fascinating way to understand ourselves. It's not about finding the perfect words. It's about making a visual picture of what's going on inside. And as you do that, you might find that the answers were there all along, just hidden in plain sight.
So it's like we're saying, show, don't tell.
Right.
But for our own inner world. And maybe that's a good way to think about these questions about being healthy and feeling good. Instead of asking, am I eating too much? What image pops into your head when you think of yourself? Like really healthy and full of energy.
You got it. It's not just about checking things off a list. It's about having a whole picture of well-being. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What kind of energy does it have?
Like those vision boards people make.
Right.
For their dream house or their travel goals. But this time it's for your own well-being. And maybe when you do that, you start to see the difference between that picture and where you are now. And that gap, that's what motivates you to change.
Exactly. Instead of focusing on what you're doing wrong, you're drawn to what feels right, what fits with that vision of feeling whole. It's a way more positive approach.
And maybe that works for relationships too. Instead of, am I being too demanding? What comes to mind when you picture a relationship that's really fulfilling and balanced?
It's about moving away from fear and scarcity and towards abundance and joy. What does a loving, supportive relationship look like to you? One where you both benefit. And how can you start creating that, both within yourself and with your partner?
It's like you're painting a picture of your ideal life, one step at a time. And those am I and are you questions, they're like the instructions, guiding you towards the colors and textures and shapes that feel most true to you.
And just like with any great piece of art, it takes time and patience and a willingness to try things out. There will be times when you doubt yourself, times when you feel stuck or things don't turn out how you planned. But that's all part of the process.
It's about accepting the messiness, the uncertainty, the fact that we're always changing and discovering new things about ourselves. And maybe that's the biggest lesson from all this. It's not about having the perfect answers. It's about learning to live with the questions, letting them guide us and challenge us, and ultimately help us understand ourselves and the world around us better.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's about trusting the journey, embracing the unknown, and never losing that curiosity. That makes us ask those big, important questions in the first place.
You know, we've talked about a lot today, from self-doubt to relationships, from everyday worries to those deep questions that keep us up at night. But one thing that really stands out to me is the power of looking at things differently. How just a small shift in perspective can open up all these new possibilities.
That's so true. The way we ask our questions shapes the answers we find. And if we choose to frame things in a way that's more positive, more empowering, more open-minded, we invite more creative and fulfilling solutions into our lives.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want you to think about the questions that really hit home for you today. What images came to mind? What new ways of seeing things did you discover? And most importantly, what's one thing you can do, even a small thing, to bring those insights into your life?
Remember, discovering who you are is a lifelong adventure. Embrace the questions, trust your gut, and never stop exploring the amazing and ever-changing world that's inside you.
Until next time, keep asking those tough questions, keep painting those vibrant visions, and keep diving deep into the fascinating world of you.